Ladies and gentlemen, I am Myron Brilliant. I'm the Executive Vice President and Head of International Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Let me begin by thanking the Prime Minister for getting us off to a very strong start, framing the discussion about the role that the public and private sector must play together to address the climate challenges we face, to deal with adaptation, mitigation, green finance, all the issues the Prime Minister outlined today. I want to acknowledge that the Prime Minister and President Sisi, you have the support of the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt and the U.S. Chamber to work closely with your government and our own government as your country prepares to host COP27 in November. It's great to join forces again with Tarek. Tarek, thank you for outlining the commitment the American Chamber is making in your country. And it was great to see so many people are there in the ballroom today. It shows we are making progress in fighting back COVID. Our friends at AmCham Egypt, we have worked with you so closely on so many issues that this is one of the most pressing challenges we face together, and we're committed to working closely with you throughout this process. On behalf of the U.S. Chamber and our President and CEO, Suzanne Clark, who you're going to hear from soon, let me recognize and welcome the speakers and participants and all our friends in both governments. We're really honored here to have all of you kick off the road to COP27. The timing of this event is really fitting, as 2022 marks one of the century of diplomatic ties between the United States and Egypt. As many of you know, the U.S. Chamber is home to the U.S.-Egypt Business Council, which was established in 1979 by Presidents Carter and Sadat. For more than 4 decades, the Council has collaborated with government and business leaders to improve economic ties, to grow and deepen trade and investment bonds. Our engagement with Egypt is very broad, very deep, and we'll bring that to bear as part of the Chamber's larger commitment in the climate and sustainability areas being discussed in these 2 days. The U.S. Chamber, through its Global Energy Institute, and you'll hear from Marty Durbin, the head of it, later in the program, has been deeply involved in focusing on how the private sector can work closely with government to leverage technology and innovation to address the climate issues that we have to talk about. Adaptation, mitigation, green finance are a core part of this. The point is that the Chamber is prepared and eager to play a significant supporting role in ensuring the success of COP27 and the contribution the private sector must play in driving global solutions. So what are our aspirations for this 2-day program? First off, we want to underscore with the American Chamber in Egypt that the government in Egypt should view the chambers as a vital partners that can help marshal the focus and support of the private sector leading to COP27. Second, as this forum demonstrates, it's a part of a larger series of actions that will be undertaken by the U.S. Chamber to help bring ideas forward, to underscore and unleash the private sector's dynamism and innovation to be a driving force to tackle the climate change that we have to deal with. We hope all of you today will seize this opportunity to bring your ideas forward to both governments and look to the Chamber and the American Chamber in Egypt to support your endeavors in this regard. Over the next 2 days, you'll hear from so many key government officials and business leaders and industry experts. We're going to cover a lot of ground, talking about specific priorities for COP27, such as financing clean energy projects, accelerating the decarbonization of the energy sector, and the role that technology must play. The work doesn't stop at the end of this forum, though. So one of the things we're going to do at the end of this session is talk about the next steps, and we hope you will all stay committed to that with us. To help us get started, I'm very pleased to bring this to Suzanne Clark. For those of you who do not know, Suzanne became the CEO of the Chamber last March. We're proud to have her leading this organization during such a transformational time for the global community, our country, and our companies. Suzanne has been an outspoken proponent of bringing a collaborative, practical, innovative, and focused approach to the issue of climate change. Suzanne, let me turn it over to you now to introduce our special guest and continue what I think is going to be an outstanding program over the next 2 days. Suzanne?
Thank you, Myron, and thank you all for joining this important forum ahead of the UN's 27th session of the Conference of the Parties. The timing of this event is appropriate, as 2022 marks 1 century of diplomatic ties between the United States and Egypt. I look forward to building on the progress we've made over the years to address the climate challenge as Egypt undertakes the responsibility of hosting COP27 this fall. For nearly 20 years, the Chamber has been an official accredited observer at UN climate conferences, and we have ensured that the voice of business is represented in these multilateral discussions. That's because we know it takes a unified commitment from the public and private sectors to forge real climate solutions. And the American business community has long led on this issue. We saw that demonstrated again last fall with a host of ambitious private sector commitments during COP26. And we hope this week's events can sustain that momentum heading into COP27 later this year. Of course, top of mind is the global energy transition. The business community is leading the research, development, and deployment of innovative solutions that reduce emissions while opening access to clean energy markets around the world. And as we pursue critical clean energy developments on everything from nuclear to renewables, electric vehicles, and more, we also cannot forget about natural gas. Over the past decade, it has been the primary driver of domestic emission reductions here in the US, and US natural gas exports have helped reverse emissions growth around the world, all while strengthening diplomatic ties with our allies. The same is true for Egypt, where partnerships with American businesses are playing a leading role in the development of natural gas resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. Together, our nations recognize that the energy transition is as much of an opportunity as it is a challenge. And as the international community turns its attention to Africa and the Middle East, Egypt is uniquely positioned to host COP27 as a leader in the region. Of course, solving our global climate challenge is not possible without the strong partnership of our leaders in government. I'm honored to be joined today by 2 officials who deeply understand our bilateral relationship and what our nations can accomplish together. Joining us today is U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. The U.S. Chamber has benefited from a close working relationship with Special Envoy Kerry during his tenure as Secretary of State, meeting several times in Washington and in Egypt to address issues central to our 2 nations. Over the past year, Secretary Kerry and the Biden administration have been a driving force in global climate discussions, helping to keep the international community moving forward toward our shared goals. Our other distinguished guest, Sameh Shoukry, is the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs and now President-Designate of COP27. His engagement with the U.S. Chamber and the American business community spans more than a decade, dating back to his time as Egypt's ambassador to Washington. We have worked together to promote our nation's commercial relationship alongside the Egyptian government and our good partners at the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt. I know today's discussion will provide a valuable perspective ahead of COP27 as we work to move toward a more sustainable energy future for the world. So with that, let's dive right in. Secretary Kerry, let me start with you. What do you see as some of the major successes coming out of COP26, and what kind of unfinished business do you hope to address at COP27 this fall?
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. First of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. And thank you very, very much for the important work the Chamber has been doing with us for a long period of time now. We've been very engaged on this issue, and we're very appreciative for the working relationship and for your leadership. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here with Sameh Shoukry. We became good friends. He was appointed about a year after I started as secretary. He began his now long tenure as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we tackled a lot of issues together, and I think there's a great deal of both affection and mutual respect between us. I look forward to working with him in this year. So you ask about the successes and the road ahead, Suzanne. Let me be factual above all, but let me also be blunt and hopefully motivating. We're in trouble. I hope everybody understands that. Not trouble we can't get out of, but we're not on a good track. A lot of good things are happening. A huge amount of good came out of Glasgow. We finished the Paris Rule Book, which was important for business and others to understand the rules of the road, transparency, accountability, avoiding green washing, be able to have transparency in what we're transacting, don't double count, deal with credits, etc. So that's progress. Many nations, most of the nations, quickly, easily, and enthusiastically embraced the idea put forward by the IPCC scientists in 2018 that well below 2 degrees doesn't cut it anymore. You've got to try to target earnestly to keep the Earth's warming at 1.5 degrees, because we're already seeing tipping points arrived at. A recent report on the Arctic, extremely disturbing. It's warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. And the changes are irreversible in much of the cases. The ice sheet melting faster than ever, the instability of the West Antarctic ice sheet. So we're also seeing the impacts through floods and fires and mudslides and the extraordinary heat, which is growing in various parts of the world. So we need to be compelled as human beings, as leaders particularly, to respond to this. And I think that the other good thing that came out of Glasgow that can help with that was an unprecedented level of private sector support. Major corporations from around the world came together, making important pledges about net zero 2050 and contributing significantly to initiatives that will make a huge difference on deforestation, on the First Movers Coalition, on adaptation and other issues. But let me be, as I promised I would be at the front of this, pretty direct about some choices we face. Coal went up 6% in the last year, the use of coal. There's about 300 and some gigawatts of coal power that is on the drawing board and going to be coming to be deployed. And that's a problem. There's just no other way to cut it. Coal is the dirtiest fuel on the planet. Nobody has figured out how to make it clean, even though they talk about clean coal. The fact is, coal is responsible principally for what is happening with respect to the fuels, the warming of the ocean. 90% of the warming goes into the ocean, and most of that is coming from the worst of it is coming from coal. But I also want to issue a warning signal. Many countries, most countries, have the ability to deploy very significant additional amounts of renewables, and they're not choosing to do that. They're moving towards gas. And gas is a bridge fuel. Gas can be helpful in this transition. Gas is going to be important to the transition. But if we move too fast and too far with too much and build out an infrastructure for 30 or 40 years with plans to be able to use it for 30 or 40 years without abatement, and I emphasize this, if it's abated, terrific. If you can capture 100% and it makes it affordable, that's wonderful. But we're not doing that. And gas is 87% plus methane. And methane is leaking in most places somewhere between 5 and 10%. And that leakage is 80 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. So we have to be thinking hard about deploying more renewables. That is absolutely critical. We have that technology. We can do it. And there are countries that are now at 70, 80, even 90% of all of their power sector is coming from renewable, and they're secure. They don't have base load problems, and we can always talk about that. So finally, let me just say quickly, Glasgow saw the greatest increase of ambition on a global basis in history. We have over 65% of global GDP committed to hold on to the 1.5 degrees, but that means we have a group of countries which are not yet there. And we very much need a number of countries to make stronger plans in the course of this year, hopefully at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. And congratulations to Egypt for stepping up and being a leader and helping to move in that direction. We look forward to that. But COP27 needs to bring additional NDCs, the national determined contributions, up from a number of countries, so the world will share in the responsibility to live up to holding the warming to 1.5 degrees. There's a lot more, but let me end there so Sameh can get in here and we can have a good conversation.
Thank you for that. And so, Mr. Shoukry, you heard Secretary Kerry talk about kind of his hopes for COP27. What is your vision leading into that session?
Well, thank you very much, President Clark, and let me congratulate you on assuming your position and to tell you that we look forward to continue our long-standing cooperation with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and also, of course, with the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt. And I'm very happy to be participating today with Secretary Kerry, my good friend John. I do look forward to working closely with him, and I think we had really a very good working relationship, and I do consider him a friend. And I must commend him on the passion with which he has engaged in terms of the discussion on climate change. And I think it is that sort of personal passion that provides the credibility and conveys the sense of urgency that I'm sure we're all feeling. We are all subject to the effects and have seen firsthand the devastating consequences of neglect that we are all responsible for, and that this is an issue that we cannot address except if we address it jointly. We are looking forward and recognize the achievements that have been the results of COP26 and congratulate the UK on the manner in which they have steered the negotiations and the outcomes that were achieved, which do, to a large extent, meet the priorities of all those parties involved. And I've just seen Minister Sharma in Cairo, and I think we both recognize that one of the important aspects of COP26 was the momentum it created and the political will it demonstrated. And thereby, I think it's incumbent upon us as we address the lead into COP27 that we maintain this posture, that we capitalize on this momentum and seize this critical moment to even raise the ambition even further. I think it's only if we continue to strive to achieve higher goals are we going to be able, in view of the daunting challenges that exist, that we will be able to fulfill the necessary requirements for us to protect the planet, to protect it for future generations, and to have left a legacy that is a productive one. So it is a matter of that you will hear us repeatedly referring to implementation. It is time for us during COP27 to concentrate on implementation. The Paris Agreement work program has been essentially completed, and we need to see greater and more efficient implementation, both of the Paris Agreement provisions, but also the broad array of pledges and that various parties and business institutions have made generally. So that is going to be our focus, and we hope that we will be coordinating and cooperating closely. In my role as President Designate, I will be undertaking an extensive round of consultations. I will be addressing this issue from a perspective of objectivity, impartiality, and a desire to maintain the consensus and the bridge building and confidence of all the parties so that we can move ahead to achieve our common objectives.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your kind words. We value our relationship very much. Secretary Kerry, you mentioned the kind of unprecedented participation by the business community in COP26. Thinking about this next round, what do you see as the places we can partner the best? You can imagine from the Chamber's perspective that we see the business community as leading on innovation, on deployment, on being a big part of the solution to this global challenge. How do we work together to sustain this momentum?
Well, Suzanne, I think one of the really positive things that's happened is the business community around the world, partly motivated by ESG requirements and discussions, which are now in the boardrooms of every major corporation around the world, and not major even. People are all thinking about their responsibilities, and the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN are driving some of the discussion. And then, of course, reality drives it. The International Energy Agency tells us, and they've been doing a terrific job, I think, of being a sort of referee in this process, that that we have to shut down about 870 gigawatts of coal by 2030. This is a very important thing for people to focus on, 2030. We have a lot of folks who are coming out and saying, well, 2050, we'll be net zero by 2050. The problem is, if you don't do enough between 2020 and 2030, you can't meet those goals, at least physically by today's capacities. You can't meet 2050 net zero. So everything is phony unless you do what you have to do between 2020 and 2030. And we're not yet on track to do that. Now, the business world has come to understand the urgency of moving, because supply chains get disrupted, business is disrupted, unbelievable costs are attached to the public sector to undo the damage that a particular storm does. We spent something like $265 billion just to clean up after 3 storms. And yet we can't find $100 billion to invest in the things we need to do to prevent the exacerbation of those storms. So the business community really has the ability to be a validator here of good choices. Unfortunately, in public life around the world, and Sameh knows this, we acknowledge it in our country, there's so much polarization and so much, back and forth in terms of the rhetoric and even some radical ideas, that we're not focusing our energy sufficiently on getting the job done. The business community has an ability to kind of be a bigger referee, if you will, on that, because it creates jobs, because it's so critical to day-to-day life. And increasingly around the world, people are seeing spontaneous, proactive leadership from business who are setting trends. The First Movers Coalition that came out of Glasgow is an example of that kind of leadership. So I think the business community can help do the single most important thing here that no government can do. And that is help to structure the finance for this transition. No government in the world has enough money to do what we know we have to do. The governments can help create a tax construct or a set of regulations. They can entice, they can incentivize, but they just don't have the budgets. Nobody has that kind of cash. And so what you need to do is take advantage of what business leadership has done, which is it has stepped up around the world in asset managers, in major financial institutions, banks, funds, and they're saying, we're prepared to invest X trillions of dollars over the course of the next years. The Glasgow Alliance of Banks, the GFANZ, the Financial Alliance, the Banking Alliance. I personally reached out to the 6 largest banks in America: Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Citi, and Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan. And they all announced publicly that over the next 10 years, to meet the 2030 date, they are prepared to invest over $4 trillion. And that's without the asset managers. Larry Fink at BlackRock, talks in terms of being able to do at least $1 trillion and perhaps more. So we're looking at clearly the potential to have major investment on a global basis. But that's investment. Let me emphasize this. It's not concessionary funding. It's investment for a return on the investment. And that's the only way we're going to get here, is by creating purchase power agreements in a particular country where the provision of energy over the next 25, 30 years through whatever build out takes place is financeable. These have to be bankable deals. We will need some concessionary funding in order to de-risk some of these investments, in order to have blended finance, which can come together to accelerate the transition to the new energy future. But that's where business can come in. They have the clout, they have the voice, they have money, they have the financials to be able to help leverage the funding necessary to get this job done. What excites me is this is doable. This is not a situation where we're staring at a doom that comes at us, like Don't Look Up with a asteroid that's coming at you. We have the ability over these next 10 years to set in train a bunch of choices that will produce new technologies, millions of new jobs. And in the end, it will create a healthier, cleaner, safer planet for everybody. And we can sort of, build a future that people could really believe in. And this is doable. What frustrates me some days is how doable it is, and yet how much procrastination there is. And our greatest enemy right now, frankly, is just the status quo. People who don't want to change, people who don't want to move to what is staring at us, which is a much better lifestyle, much better economy if we make the right choices.
Thank you for that, Mr. Shoukry. Let me bring you back in on a couple of those points. I think what's so important about discussions like this is we get great minds together to negotiate a better future for all of us. And there's a lot we agree on. There's some we disagree on. You and I might feel a little differently about the role of natural gas in getting to where we want to go. But we certainly agree, I think, with Secretary Kerry's important points about the role of business and innovation. And so let you follow up on two of the comments. One, what do you think the role of the business community is leading up to COP27 and kind of sustaining this momentum, but also picking up on the Secretary's important points about financing? So let you jump in.
Well, certainly, I think the business community and the NGO community in general is a very important segment. And the finance is available, and the rewards on that finance, I think, is already a matter that is being assessed, and it's clear that the future is going to be sustained on the basis of renewable energies and clean energies, and it naturally flows into our objectives and ambitions to address the issues of climate change. But it is a matter of maintaining the focus and the necessity for finance. And it is that discussion, and recognizing that COP27 is an African COP, and that for Egypt, we will be listening carefully to the needs and priorities of African and other developing countries who have suffered greatly from the negative effects of climate change, but who also recognize the need to work hand in hand with all of the parties to be able to deal with these issues. And here, the issue of finance is fundamental because of the deficiencies that exist, and being frank, in most of the developing world, and their need to channel the available resources that John has referred to provide them the ability to continue to work on both mitigation and adaptation, and at the same time create for their citizens the necessary economic prosperity environment that they deserve. And here, both the private sector, the NGO community is fundamental in generating that finance. I recognize the point that John has made, in that this is investment, and investment necessitates reward. But that reward will certainly be available once that we have the momentum and the sustainability and the credibility of those investments and their impact both for the overall objective of dealing with climate change, but also the impact they have on sustainable development. The UN development goals can be further advanced and expanded by the opportunities that exist by channeling investments towards new technologies, renewable energies, and that provides new job opportunities, and thereby we create a benevolent cycle of good that I think is necessary for us to deal with the challenges.
Secretary Kerry, you mentioned a minute ago the First Movers Coalition, and the Chamber was really pleased to work with you in your office both on that and the Clean Energy Deployment Initiative. And I wonder if you might tell our audience a little bit more about both of those initiatives and why they're so important to the success of the overall effort.
Absolutely. I'm delighted to do that. Could I just mention one thing, because I don't want any misinterpretation here, on gas, which will be a big debate over the course of this next year, I'm sure. I'm for gas as this transitional effort. And I hope someone will come up with the technology that can affordably find a way to capture the emissions. Gas by itself is not the problem. It's the byproduct of how it's used. And when gas, which as I said is mostly methane, is burned, you get CO2. You get 50% less approximately than with coal. So I'm for gas. I'll take a gas turbine in the place of a coal-fired power plant anytime, unabated coal today. But that's not, you've got to make sure, Suzanne, that if you're talking about a 30 or 40-year horizon, which is currently necessary in terms of amortizing the costs of that, you got a problem if you don't have the abatement. So that's what everybody has to understand is we're not going to solve the problem unless we can capture and store or find a utilization for carbon. I noticed that in Australia, they just came up with a way to turn CO2 into solid. And that may, who knows, may possibly be opening up a different future. The First Mover Coalition is an effort by companies, by major companies, Holcim, Lafarge Holcim, for instance, the largest cement dealer in the world, is now making green cement. And they have made a pledge, as have others, that they're going to continue to do that and be able to bring the market, if you will, faster to the growth level that you need so the market is operating under its own forces. Volvo has made a commitment that they're going to buy 10% green steel only and put it into their cars. And they've decided that when it gets down to the car, it's only pennies of differential in cost, and this can work. So they're saying to somebody who will make green steel, we're going to be there. We will buy. Here's the amount we're committing to. Maersk, the largest container ship operator in the world, has made a commitment that the next 8 ships they build will be carbon free. So a shipbuilder can start to design and make that carbon free ship, get the contract, and that begins to open up the market to new technology, new possibilities. Amazon has signed up, Bank of America, Boeing, for instance, and Delta, and United Airlines have all agreed that they're going to only buy 5% of the fuel they'd use is going to be 85% emissions free. So the people are setting standards to try to accelerate the creation of the marketplace. And it's a very exciting initiative. There are great, about 36 great companies that have signed up to it. And we hope more people will, because this will accelerate the transition to green in ways that nothing else can do. It's the market itself taking hold and working.
Thank you for that. And as I said, we've appreciated working with your office on both of those initiatives. And I also appreciate what you said about gas and the importance of getting the infrastructure right. Mr. Shoukry, coming back to you, it's an exciting time in U.S.-Egyptian relationship, right? 100 years, as we said earlier. This is an important diplomatic milestone. So as you think about what we can do to work together, the private sector and public sectors in our countries, what are your hopes for the relationship going forward?
Well, certainly, overall, we look forward to maintaining the strategic nature of our relationship, one that has been highly beneficial to Egypt over the years in its progress in its developmental objectives, but also in the area of security, maintaining peace and security in our region, and furthering, strengthening our common interests, but also meeting the challenges that we both face. I think we have a very large sector of unanimity of understanding of the challenges that we face, and that we can only effectively do so in cooperation and coordination between us. We're looking forward to the celebration of the centennial of the relationship. We kicked it off with the resumption of the strategic dialogue, and I'm glad to say that it was a very productive and in-depth discussion of the variety of the components of this very intricate, important, and far-reaching relationship. And we're equally looking forward to our cooperation with the U.S. In our capacity as president of COP27. The U.S.'s re-engagement has been quite rewarding, and the U.S. has demonstrated during COP26 its willingness to engage effectively with all of the parties. I think the conclusion of the U.S.-China agreement demonstrated the political will, but from two of the greatest emitters, but it also is an indication of the desire to find common ground on meeting the crucial issues. The relationship is a productive one between us generally, and it can certainly play an important role in moving forward the objectives of a successful COP27. And also we rely on the U.S. Private sector, the participation and the commitment of the U.S. companies, as was demonstrated by much of what John has said, is truly important in maintaining the sustainability of the finance discussion. Finance will remain a very prominent issue that's going to have an impact on future, whether COP27 or beyond, and it is necessary for us to rely on sustainable and predictable finance if we are to move forward. I have to say also that there is a role to be played in this part by a positive non-state actors in the U.S., whether it's at the state level or from institutions like AmCham and others who have demonstrated their commitment to the climate change discussion and their willingness to play an active role in it.
Secretary Kerry, I don't want to let this session end without bringing up the global methane pledge. I mean, your team was instrumental in getting more than 100 countries to agree to the pledge, and maybe you could take a minute to talk about the next steps.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. And I just parenthetically say quickly, thank you to Egypt for the critical role Sameh just described, and I want to underscore that from the initiative taken by President Sadat to make peace, to the many times that President Sisi, Sameh himself have been involved in the region with Libya, with so many other countries, Sudan, etc. So we're very appreciative, and we value enormously the primary role that Egypt plays on a regional basis. We thank them for it. With respect to the methane, methane is a sort of not very well understood or known entity. It's one of the greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, it is becoming more and more prominent for a number of reasons. One of the most threatening reasons is, let me give you an example. Russia spans, I think, 7 or 8 time zones. 2/3 of the landmass of Russia sits on top of frozen land, permafrost. And because of global climate change, that permafrost, not just in Russia, but across Alaska and the north, is thawing. And as it thaws, it releases amazing amounts of methane that has been locked in for literally, tens of thousands of years. And methane, when it's first released in the first 10, 15 years or so, is far more potent, doing destructive damage to our lives than CO2. It's 80 times more damaging, more destructive. And so we have this threat now of open mines from which methane leaks, or pipes from which it leaks in transportation and elsewhere. And estimates are in Russia, for instance, that the leakage is somewhere around 5 to 10%, as it is in some other parts of the world. And so you could actually light a match. If you saw bubbles coming up in the water in the north or various places, you light a match, the water will light on fire. I mean, this is methane just coming up. And we have to contain it because it is so destructive. So 109 countries have signed up to the effort to try to do this. Now, the good thing about it is methane is relatively easy to contain, except for the permafrost issue, by low technology kind of responses, not that expensive, not that hard to do. And what we've achieved is a global pledge. This is a shared initiative with the EU, with Frans Timmermans and the EU, to try to get a global reduction of the emissions, these free emissions of methane, of 30% over the course of the next 10 years. No one country has to produce the 30%. Whatever a country can contribute to the effort is welcome. And the 109 countries have signed up in order to do that, including China, which signed an agreement with us that they will issue a national methane action plan this year. They will submit it to the COP27 in Egypt. And obviously China is the largest emitter in the world. So this is significant to have them on board. We need all countries to be part of this effort, obviously, because it's one of the best ways we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The International Energy Agency has told us that if we succeed in getting a 30% reduction in the next 10 years, which is achievable fairly easily, then that is the equivalent of every automobile in the world, every truck in the world, every airplane in the world, every ship in the world, all going to zero emissions in that span of time. It actually saves about 0.2 degrees of warming on the modeling. So we hope every nation will be much more serious about methane now than they ever have been. And deforestation goes hand in hand with that. And one of the great successes of Glasgow was a commitment by 2028, 2030 that deforestation will end in a non-sustainable way. So I think we've got an opportunity to make huge progress here, and we look forward to working with countries to do that.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. Let me give Minister Shoukry the last word here. So as the host of COP27, you're talking to your American partners in government and in business. What do you think the role of the U.S. is in leading up to this important conference?
Well, as I mentioned, we're looking forward to full U.S. engagement, and we're confident with the leadership of both John, but also the commitment that President Biden himself has indicated to the addressing the challenges of climate change. We're confident that U.S. leadership will continue to support the process, will continue to address the issue in a comprehensive manner and create the necessary environment. We hope that all of the issues will be addressed in a holistic manner, because it has been an issue in the past where there has been a lack of confidence, to put it bluntly, in terms of what the objectives are and what the intentions of many of the parties are, whether it is a division between developing and developing countries, or whether it's an issues of underlying economic potential. And I think it is now more apparent to all that we need to address this issue with greater transparency and to deal with it with all of its components. And here I mention again that the issue of finance, I think, has been highlighted, as is the issue of mitigation and adaptation. But there are other potential areas where we need to also concentrate our efforts, is the matter of the transfer of technologies, for example. If there is still a reluctance on part of some to provide the technologies necessary for us to address the challenges of climate change, to depend more on renewable energies and the technologies associated with it, then there will always be deficiencies. And I think that in the US's recognition of the holistic nature of this discussion and the need to create a higher degree of confidence and reliability, I think that is an important role, and I hope that one that will be promoted by the United States in its leadership role. It has a great deal of influence that it can utilize, and I think the cause is worthy that we all give it our best shot.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate both of your remarks today. Thank you both for being with us. Thank you all for participating in this forum. Together, we can strengthen our nation's efforts to address the climate challenge as we build momentum for these really important discussions ahead of COP27. So thank you to the audience. Thank you to our distinguished guests. I hope you enjoy the rest of the program.